Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You've reached the No Name Cinema Society, the film review show that dares to dig a little bit deeper. It is Thursday, October 29th, 2020, 9 o'clock Eastern, 6 o'clock Pacific, and we are here to kick off our 61st series of episodes with our review of the current feature released on Netflix, Over the Moon. Hi, everybody. My name is Jonathan Betzler. I'm one of your hosts here for this evening, back here at my home in Los Angeles after a brief sojourn in Newtown, Pennsylvania, as you might recall. For the last couple episodes, I got Luke here with me. And Luke is just as concerned as you are about movie theaters. They remain closed in Los Angeles. They did open in New York State this past Friday, but not in New York City. And we did talk about driving the 35 plus miles to see something in a theater, but the fact is studios are pulling their content from theaters constantly, and there wasn't that much to see, and so therefore we returned to reviewing a film that went straight to Netflix. It was supposed to be released in theaters, supposedly, and therefore it is eligible for Oscar consideration come April, and therefore it is eligible for review from us. And so we move forward with Over the Moon, and we hope to be back in theaters for our 62nd series of episodes, which hopefully begins next month. So here to review Over the Moon with me, first, ladies and gentlemen, my glowing friend who's a nervous talker, Patrick Taylor's here with me.
Hello.
There you go. Proof is in the pudding. Hopefully it won't be all night with him. And I'm very excited, ladies and gentlemen, to introduce to you and yet another new member of the society. You've heard me talk often about Devin's much younger girlfriend. Well, she finally turned 18, so we can legally bring her on the show. Ladies and gentlemen, Kelly O'Malley is here.
Hi.
Welcome to the society, Kelly.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
And you're in Texas at the moment, are you not?
Yeah, I am. I'm in town for a wedding.
Central Time Zone representing. Here, ladies and gentlemen, is our schedule of this, our 61st series episode, starting, of course, tonight with a review of Over the Moon. This upcoming Monday, November 2nd, will be our indie spotlight, Clouds of Sils Maria. Next Thursday, November 5th, will be our classic movie discussion of the Bond film From Russia with Love. And on Monday, November 9th, will be our 45th Sound Off. Zach and James will be with me. We're going to play the movie game. We're going to recast some of the films that Patrick, James, and I watched from 1959. Also, James and I are going to do a top 5 directors working today. Okay, so guys, this is the third animated film that we ever reviewed on the show. We reviewed the film Home in episode 6 before we separated episodes into currents, indies, and classics. Also reviewed the film Minions from episode 13.1, both in our very first season. There have also been 3 animated films to make my top 10 since we started the show. Inside Out in 2015, Kubo and the Two Strings in 2016, which incidentally also made Alex's top 10 of the decade, and Ralph Breaks the Internet from 2018. Little extra information, ladies and gentlemen. You guys ready for the summary?
Give it to us.
Bring it on, he says. All right. Over the Moon. Fei loses her mother at a young age, but she clings to the stories her mother used to tell her of the moon goddess, who represents true and everlasting love. When Fei's father starts to see a new woman, Fei decided she needs to go to the moon to prove the moon goddess exists, and therefore remind her father of the true and everlasting love he had with her mother. Guys, it's time for opening thoughts, which is a 1-sentence or phrase review. Very, very brief. Kelly, if you've watched Devin on the show, you know he's terrible at condensing himself to 1 sentence or less. So
I brought that up. You told me I was wrong.
So, Patrick, show her how it's done. 1 sentence. How'd you feel about the film?
I felt I would never have watched this film, but I was delighted to actually be a part of it. Would have never watched it.
Okay, well, that is a long sentence, but a sentence nonetheless.
There was a colon in there or something. There was like a semicolon, you know? It was like...
Yeah, I don't know. It was a little long. Kelly?
I found it to be beautifully relevant to all ages.
Okay. That's fine. That works. And my opening thought is well-intentioned, but very poorly written. And it looks like we're going to get into it on this particular show because I've got a lot of quibbles, but we always try to start with the positives. And for me, most of the positives lie in things that fall under direction. And it's directed by Oscar winner Glenn Keane. He won for Dear Basketball with Kobe Bryant in the short category a couple years ago. And he's been a Disney animator for years and years and years. And he's sort of branching out on his own now as a director. For one thing, I feel like the imagery and animation is what stood out to me as one of the strongest aspects. I never really understood what was so visually impressive or interesting about Spider-Verse a couple years ago. This film, however, stood out to me visually. I really liked the look of the animation and the way they mimicked live action camera angles and movement. I thought the color palette was appropriate and compelling, and it was also different and creative once we got to the moon. I thought a lot of the character design was inventive and interesting, some minor exceptions. The world was detailed, even if it didn't always make sense, and I'll get to that later. First, let's talk about some of the visuals.
I thought the coloring, the textures, the way they introduce you to this home-like environment, it felt like some place that I had been, but I had never been before. It felt very much welcoming and beautiful and bright. It felt like a place that I would want to live, but it's in China, so I've never even seen it. So it was great.
Oh, I thought you meant the moon. I thought you wanted to live on the moon.
No. I want to live in China now.
Kelly, look.
I liked the contrast.
By contrast, you mean the China elephant the moon?
Yeah.
I clarify because you could also mean like the actual contrast of color, and the way they use contrast in individual frames.
Right. I kind of actually wanted more detail or something.
I wanted more story detail, but do you mean like in the characters or the humans? Like by characters, I mean like the invented characters.
Yeah, I mean like I wanted there to be a little bit more, maybe depth.
Cool. Patrick, do you agree with that?
No, I got into the world and I understood the smoothness. I kind of was living in the world that they created and I was fine with it. And then when they switched to the moon, I thought the Technicolor stuff so bright and vibrant. I could just see it as a video game, enjoy this thing.
In terms of video games.
Thinking in terms of just products, like this is gold. You got dolls, you got games, you got books. Great.
Such a Hollywood guy. I mean, I kind of see your point now that I think about it, and it didn't occur to me, but certainly some of the invented characters were sort of like basic, each had their own sort of color, and there wasn't necessarily texture within them. I do think it was a choice that didn't bother me because it was such invented from scratch. They didn't necessarily feel fully alive. I can see that. The other thing that I thought was really strong about it, and it's tangentially related to direction, is I thought the film was really well cast overall. I thought the voice actors almost all did a terrific job interpreting their characters and breathing a little bit of life into them. Even Ken Jeong was less annoying than he usually is. Most importantly, they got some power singing voices for the mediocre songs, and I'll get to that later. Philippa Sue and Ruthie Ann Miller are among the best Broadway has to offer. Kathy Ang, as the lead preteen character Fei Fei, has an impressively powerful voice with a mastery of belt and timbre. The vocal talent was pretty outstanding. Kelly?
Yeah, I did too. I thought casting was spot on and what they were able to really convey what the characters were going through. I love Philippa Sue, so that was exciting. I actually like Ken Jeong. I think he's really funny. I almost wanted more of him.
I wonder if you had more of him, you'd be like, oh, that is starting to get annoying. I feel like it was just enough. He's a small doses kind of a guy to me.
That's a good point.
The talent, Patrick.
Yeah, I thought the talent was great. I thought the singing performances, they gave you the feels. There was only one part when the little boy started rapping that I was like, oh, this is a little ridiculous. But everything else, I was like, oh, they went K-pop, that's great, or they went full musical. So it had a lot of range, and I thought the voice actors, just the characters, they all fit the bill. So
that does segue us to one of my quibbles. Kelly has been trying to get on the show because she really wants to fight with me. So this is where I think we might be, is because I do think that the songs were an issue.
We're not going to fight.
Oh, good. As fans of the show know, I started out in musical theater, and I used to date a Broadway girl, and so I've been dragged to more workshops of musicals than I'd care to recollect. I was at one of the first readings of Avenue Q, as you see here, and I won't tell you which one's my ex-girlfriend. And I was at the musical version of Dogfight, which launched the team of Benj Pasek and Justin Paul, who've now won a Tony and 2 Oscars. The point is, at these things, you can immediately tell the difference between that work and the work that's more derivative and ultimately hollow, like what we have here. It felt like a student version of an attempt at musical theater songs. The songs of the good stuff take on a life of their own. They tend to strike a deeper chord, inspire raw emotion, and that's not the case here. They seemed to want to be like the songs for the Disney films, and as such, they never felt fresh or impactful. There was that one song that Patrick referred to. It was a good idea in theory, but instead of aping Disney songs, they aped K-pop, what I still felt was derivative. Patrick, you're a composer, so I wonder if you feel more about this, but the whole score and songs felt like that uncle or aunt who's trying way too hard to be cool and seem younger than they are. It felt, quite frankly, desperate. It sounds, Kelly, that you might agree.
I asked myself several times while I was watching, does this need to be a musical? They were mostly pretty songs and the vocals were good. I'm assuming the demographic is younger.
Who's younger than you, Kelly O'Malley?
Not many, but there are some. Part of the genius of the classic Disney era is that kids can easily sing along and remember the tunes. And I don't feel like this. They were all in really high keys, which I think is stylistically true for maybe Chinese culture, but there was no balance in it. And again, like melodically, like I don't know that any of them like really stuck with me. The one I found the most fun was her big diva solo. And even then I was like, thinking that could have been in there without the whole thing being a musical.
That's true, and I was initially interested in the diva solo, but it also felt desperate. Like I like the idea of it. The song's called Ultra Luminary, but then even when they tried to rhyme way and me, like making her pronounce it May, and I was just like, you're reaching, guys. Like, come on, another draft of this. Patrick, you're a composer. Do you disagree?
It's about expectations for me. Let's keep it real. Was I expecting this Netflix film to be The Lion King? It lived up to my expectations of what I expected. It was good. It was fine. As much problems as JB has with the story, I thought the way the songs helped the story, helped me feel them. They were very manipulative, obviously. They helped me understand the emotion. I'm a grown man who cried from one of the songs. It gave me the feels. It did. It made me think about losing my grandma.
I am a crier, and I did not. Knowing I'm watching it for the show, like maybe I'm thinking hypercritically, it didn't hit me because I was just kept thinking about how derivative everything was song-wise. In terms of helping the story, I actually thought that was weak as well. Broadway musicals do this as well. They use songs as montages and try to cover a lot of narrative ground. And when Broadway shows do it, whether it be Barnum or Camelot, it's bad there too. Frequently Band-Aids to get a lot of exposition in, and those songs tend to be the worst, and that's true here as well.
I wish I had been able to watch it with that lens, Patrick. I'm a crier, and the themes really did hit me.
Yeah, I really do think when people walk in with high expectations, it ruins films. Don't do it.
Sure. That's why I tried to see things opening weekends to limit the preformed complex as much as possible. That's what I call it, the preformed complex. And because it does affect things, and that's also, Kelly, why I don't tell people what they're watching when they come to my house for CMSs.
That's why I don't come.
Patrick doesn't come either. All right, screenplay. I hate to pick on the screenplay because the writer passed away at a young age from cancer, unfortunately, during the production of the film. But I do find it to be the major issue of the final product. I found the script to be very paint by numbers, similarly derivative of so many films of its kind, but it failed to capture the same kind of magic or ever feel alive. It painted its emotions in broad strokes, almost in a similarly condescending way that we discussed when we did Enola Holmes last month. They assume that kids won't know the difference. They rush through its prologue and use the songs to string together narrative montages, like I was saying. The result is, though we academically acknowledge the emotion, we don't feel it deeply enough to care. On top of that, I thought the dialogue was extremely basic, uninspired, non-specific. The characters were all two-dimensional, and that's not something that I'd say about most of the Disney films. Some of the various creatures that appear in the film feel like leftovers from the Disney's animated central casting for cute sidekicks for easy laughs. They were contrived to me and shoehorned into the narrative.
This is a child's film about loss. It's trying to teach broad strokes.
I think Disney's proven that it doesn't need to be condescending. Just because it's animated, I think Disney and others have proven that it doesn't necessarily need to be the case. I talked about Kubo and the Two Strings, and it's about a lot more. I don't think that's an excuse.
You're speaking from a knowledgeable perch, which is great. I'm speaking from just turning on a film on Netflix. This is showing me when you add love to your life, it's never taking anything away from you. It teaches you good things. It's like the Bible. Like
my opening thought was well-intentioned but poorly written. Now I'm explaining why I feel like it was poorly written, because it's well-intentioned, but it could have been, in my view, should have been a little stronger. Another pass or two, honestly, from a screenplay point of view. Kelly.
I wish that we had gotten to know the mom a little more instead of just throwing it, like you were saying, in a montage. I think we would have been able to feel more deeply, and I think kids can relate to that. We're smart enough to figure that out, but we also want to connect, and we want to be able to really feel that. It would have helped the rest of the story land if we had just been given a little bit more time with the mom in a meaningful way, so that we could carry that loss through the movie with Feifei.
That's one way. I actually have another option. The next thing I have is what I think should have been done instead, and I actually have the opposite, less than. But let me explain that when I get to it, because I agree with your point overall. I have a different approach to, I think, achieve the same goal. Before I get to explain what I think should have happened, like Kelly was saying, I do want to say something else about what Kelly said earlier. Because one of my other issues was Wholeness of World. And I think this is what Kelly was sort of getting at when she talked about some of the detail, what I call the Wholeness of World, and how like this invented world works. Like they're inventing rules, but you've got to stay true to your own rules. I mean, the first act sets up a girl who excelled in science, which didn't exactly match with her belief in mythology. But I was willing to go along with it for a little while until anything scientific got thrown out the window. So I was disconnected from the first act plot point. The offshoot of that is that the moon itself didn't make sense to me. Again, I would have been willing to go along with it if they were able to somehow mix the science and the mythology, like the tears that became the moon dust. I thought that was an interesting idea, but it sort of went away when tears all of a sudden became little figures. Stuff like where the mythology was explained by science somehow, or vice versa, that would have worked for me.
I see what you're saying, but I like the idea that a myth and science can live together. Like that you don't have to pick one or the other.
I like that idea too. I wanted them to interact more, but I felt like science was sort of eschewed, and all of a sudden, like it didn't. Like I would like it all to make sense. You know, I like the idea of mythology, and I wish there was like a way that it was explainable scientifically, especially because she was so interested in science. Because they set that up, I felt like that was a disconnect.
Yeah, I think I was just focused on, I loved that they had a little girl who was smart and interested in science.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
You want explanations from this movie? The movie was not about science.
I feel like they are their own worst enemy in the sense that they set it up. If she wasn't such a science whiz, her science expertise, it would have been good and interesting. And I think underscore the young heroine situation if she had used some of her science knowledge to... It actually didn't make sense scientifically. Like I wish it had, but it didn't.
Well, it was kind of about building on inertia. I could suspend my disbelief.
I'm not a scientist, but I felt like it checked out.
I felt like you could go to the moon. Yeah,
I accepted it.
I was along for the beginning, but it got to a point where like fireworks as the ignition, I just was not. There's another movie, not animated, but the movie Explorers from 1985, young Ethan Hawke, young River Phoenix. It has enough science to allow you to swallow the rest. And I don't think it would have been that difficult.
I think again, it was the blend of science and myth, like science and imagination.
That's a good segue to what I think maybe should have explained all this for me. And here's what I think the script should have been, that would have worked for me anyway. And Kelly alluded to this earlier with the prologue. I actually had the different approach in that we cut the prologue altogether and start with a mildly depressed girl who is still dealing with the death of her mother. The mother exists in our imagination, which is solely through her eyes. And I think that would have had a similar emotional impact to what you're saying. We would have gotten to know the memory of her. We could have more time for the setup, which is really about the threatening arrival of a potential stepmother. The inspiration, I think, for the rest of it should have been basically The Wizard of Oz. Without being an exact copy, I think it should have taken a little from that film's structure, which would explain the moon environment a little more, as well as the parallels between the journeys of Feifei and the goddess, which on the surface were a little contrived to get to the theme that Patrick wants to talk about. I would have bought it more if it were something of a dream, or potentially a dream. And honestly, some of the funny little characters could have been voiced by some of the actors from the real world, further advancing that parallel. I also, like I said, wonder if her interest in science would have made her less of a believer in the stories, distant, as she grows away from her mother, and then her trip to the moon, or potentially dream trip to the moon, would have added to her journey. More of an arc if she'd lost that bit of herself that believed in the mythology, and then found it again through this Oz-like trip. So that's sort of what I thought about what a direction that would have landed, pardon the pun, a little bit more for me. Guys, do you hate it?
As long as the songs were good, I could buy that too. You know?
Yeah.
The songs weren't that good.
I'm thinking. So I was listening to the songs. I was like, I could see my kids. I could play this for my kids in the car. They might like it. You know, like.
Patrick, you don't have kids.
Of course, I don't have children, but I.
Kelly, my Wizard of Oz plan.
I think that sounds like a really good way of fixing it, but then I guess it goes back to who wrote this film and like how did she want to tell the story?
Of course, I mean, like for sure. I am, putting my. I mean, I am myself. I can only ascribe my aesthetic to it, but I mean, like I do feel like that would have solved a lot of the logical problems without losing some of the emotion and perhaps I think enhancing the emotion. Because, what the Disney films work is because they actually are for all ages, whether it's the current crop led by Frozen or the older crop, Little Mermaid, or even before that, whether it's Peter Pan, Snow White. They kind of do work for all ages. So saying it's a kid's movie, maybe a young set will get into it for a little bit, but I don't think it has the lasting power because of its lack of these basic screenplay structural tenets.
Right.
I disagree. Only because I think it will have the lasting power in its genre of dealing with of how to properly deal with loss. The Lion King didn't show you how to properly deal with this like this movie did. Kid went crazy, right? And he just went off and went rogue. That's not what you're supposed to do for 15 years and then come back and save your village. No, you're supposed to deal with it as a child. You're supposed to understand that you can let things go while still loving them. And so you could show this to your child while they're dealing with grief. In that it spent so much time on grief and it did it so well, it will have a place because of just the nature of its subject matter and the way they wrapped it up in a sweet blanket.
I acknowledge that, and I said it was well intentioned. I mean, I just think it could have been better, is my point. And Patrick really wants to talk about this. So Patrick, let's get to themes. What do we call this segment?
The T word.
That's the T word. We're going to talk about themes. We used to refer to it as the T word because one of the original founding members, Davey, hated talking about themes, so we would have to tiptoe around it and call it the T word. So that's now the name of the segment. And Patrick, you have hit on the head what I have as the number one theme. Say it for me.
Dealing with loss.
Grief, yes. More than anything else, it's about grief and the difficulty of moving on from great loss, whether that's Fei-Fei's loss or the moon goddesses. In that sense, it's universal and an important topic for kids to be confronted with. I personally felt like the film failed to get underneath the topic, but it does portray the very real issue of a loss that hangs over us like a dark cloud and holds us back from living our own lives. In its own didactic way, it reminds us that we are still alive, and though we lost someone we loved, we dishonor their memory if we lose interest in our own journey and progress. Acceptance is Kubler-Ross's final stage of the process of grief, and it very well may be the most difficult. The film teaches kids that moving on doesn't mean we've forgotten our loved one. It just means we haven't forgotten everyone else that's still here. Patrick?
I also think that it's about, understanding that, this child went through this grief. The moon goddess went through this grief. The father went through the grief, and they're all dealing with it in different.
And there's no one right way. You talked about This is the right way to do it. I don't think there's one right way.
And they learn from, they learn from each other. When the child was in her darkest moment, the moon goddess saw that and tried to help her because she knows what that grief can bring. And the child learned from the moon goddess, and everyone's trying to help each other, which is good for a kid to understand that you're not alone in your grief. I think a child would be able to walk away from this and understand some of those broad strokes.
Sure. I don't think it's subtle. I don't disagree with your points at all. And what you said is a good segue to my next theme, but see what Kelly has to say about grief and loss.
Had it gotten off on the right track, I think it would have landed better. That moment where Chang'e,
I just call her the moon goddess because I didn't want to try pronouncing it.
when she, in her grief, when she sees Fei-Fei, it takes her outside of her own self. Like that moment of like recognizing, because she's like, let grief make her so full of rage and feel like she's not compassionate anymore. Like she's behaving badly, but it's one form of grief. It's how it can come out if you're bottling it up and you're not dealing. And then she's completely devastated. And that moment when she recognizes in a fellow being, I thought was really powerful. It's not just for kids, these themes, and that's why I wish some of the stuff had been elevated, and like you're saying, maybe another cast had been done. I love that it's different types of grief or different types of loss. Like they both lost, and they both don't know that you can love you can love without having to say goodbye to that person, that you can let someone else in.
Well, you're talking about the moon goddess sort of as a segue to my next theme, and it didn't land quite as well, but I saw potential there that in my imaginary script that I wanted to do off of this that maybe would have explored this a little more, and it's about heroes. They say you should never meet your heroes, and invariably a part of growing up is realizing that those we look up to are also human. Though technically, obviously, the word human doesn't apply to the goddess, she is fallible, and her pain dictates her behavior, which bursts Fei-Fei's bubble of idolatry. And I know for me, when the scandal about Pete Rose betting on baseball first came out, I was confused, bewildered. Recognizing that our idols have dimension is one of the sobering realities of growth, and the film hints at this, but kind of gets away from it. I wish it explored a little more, but the foundation was there. Anything on heroes, or am I overreaching?
To be honest, she meets her hero and she looks up to her still. It wasn't like she failed in her eyes, even though she gave her.
But she should have. Don't you feel like that's a lesson that they drop? Like she should have fallen in her eyes a little bit.
It could have happened for sure. That could have been kind of confusing because we wanted to see this woman, get through her grief. I didn't miss that, but it could have added one more dimension to the story that could have been interesting. It could have.
Thanks for that, Patrick. I got something, Kelly.
I'm trying to call back on my religious studies degree. I didn't ever study Chinese gods, but my understanding is that they're fallible, just like Roman and Greek gods. So I don't know that it would be a huge shock to learn that there's a flaw in this hero of yours.
That's true, but I mean, because I was referring to human heroes as well. I talked about Pete Rose. So I mean, I think the idea being the way in which Fei-Fei looked up to her, and then she's like the quasi-villain in the piece for a good portion of the movie.
Yeah, I took it, I guess, that Fei-Fei was so focused on getting her dad reunited with her mom that it didn't matter.
I agree it didn't matter in the script, but I wondered if we're talking about lessons for kids, I felt like that could have been something. Basically, all these themes, the grief is very obvious and almost too much so, but none of it really landed for me, I guess, is the overall point. So I feel like we got to close out, guys, but do you have anything more? I don't want to shut you guys up, but I do need to close out soon because we have to be under 30 minutes. Patrick, any closing thoughts for you guys?
Well, I do think we are looking at it through, if we were looking at it through the lens of a child's eyes, the blend between magic and science in a child's eyes, they can still believe in Santa Claus, but understand what oxygen is, right? You can believe in magic and you can believe in science, and those two things don't have to be apart. I don't know. I think we're using adult lenses for this.
I am who I am, and that's all that I am.
You're more, JB.
I can only respond to myself, but I think the main thing is why I'm disappointed is I saw potential for more, because I do think that these themes are important. I saw the groundwork there, but not done to its fullest potential, and that, to me, is a waste, and that's why I'm maybe being a little bit harsh. Kelly?
It made me think of Mulan and how Mulan got some flack for maybe over Americanizing or blending in the Japanese culture, and it seems like there was a lot of care to really honor Chinese culture.
For sure.
So I think
we talked about that. That was great.
Yeah, and so I think there's so much care in taking a real myth and getting to explore that, and I wonder then how for little kids to get to connect not just to the theme but also to just get to experience their culture as being told, or their in a movie like this. I think that alone is really powerful and important.
The representation element we haven't talked about it yet is super important. Another reason why I said well-intentioned, but that doesn't, I'm looking at it from just a dramaturgical point of view. My sense is that you agree with me a little bit in that this was a bit of a, Patrick liked it more than you, I think. It was a bit of a miss, it was a near miss.
Yeah, it didn't quite land for me. I mean, Patrick kind of said it. I wouldn't pay to go see it in a movie theater, but I had Netflix and I had a little cheese plate and I felt really cozy and I watched it and I enjoyed watching it.
So in terms of our next current feature, I was going to tell you that it was going to be The Happiest Season, reviewed on Thursday, December 3rd, 2020, to kick off our 60-second series of episodes. But just this morning, they canceled its release. So stay tuned. We do not know what's going to be next. Kristen Stewart is in The Happiest Season, which would have been a nice segue to our very next show, which is this Monday night. The Indie Spotlight is this Monday, November 2nd, which we spotlight Clouds of Sils Maria, released in the United States in 2015, because we're spotlighting indies from 5 years ago. And that's coming up on Monday, November 2nd. So, guys, that's it for tonight. Say goodbye to the audience. They're just waving. So those of you listening to us on audio podcast, just so you know what's going on. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, this meeting of the No Name Cinema Society is adjourned.